My name is Marc Hachadourian. I'm Director of Glasshouse Horticulture and Senior Curator of Orchids here at the New York Botanical Garden, and we are standing in the palm dome of the incredible Enid Haupt Conservatory, one of America's premier Victorian glasshouses, and my office. I think I've got one of the best offices in New York City, in which it's always 80 degrees and sunny, and I'm surrounded by some of the world's most incredible tropical plants.
Where's your desk then? Not a desk job.
No, it's not a desk job, which is why I love what I do, working here at the Botanical Garden as one of our curators and horticulturists, overseeing a lot of our botanical collections and exhibitions.
And how long have you been working at the Botanical Garden?
I've been here now, I just started my 25th year at the New York Botanical Garden. So I've spent half of my life in horticulture under glass here in New York City.
Ah, fantastic. Well, what are we about to see today?
So we're going to take a short trip, starting in the Palm Dome, looking at some of the remarkable plants that are here, and then journey into our lowland rainforest galleries to see some of the really incredible, historic, and unusual specimens that exist there.
I mean, this is going to be a total treat. I mean, I feel like you've already given this tour. You just have this down. Do you practice this in the mirror?
No. My friends make fun of me. They say, you get your tour voice going.
Yeah, you definitely have a tour voice.
I've been doing this obviously for a long time, not only here at the garden, but plants are my life. I've been passionate about it since I was young. And so these are my kids. This is my space. I absolutely love it. And one of the things I love about working in public horticulture is sharing my information and the plants with our visitors and public, and now your audience.
Fantastic. Well, let's go for it, because you already have so many great plants on this floor.
Well, starting in the Palm Dome, it's difficult to ignore what's behind me in the pool. And this year, for the first time as a part of this exhibition, we grew a number of Victoria cruziana plants here, in which many people recognize this kind of iconic plant, the giant Amazonian water lily with its incredible leaves. These are only babies with leaves just shy of 3 feet in diameter, but they can reach tremendous sizes, almost 7 feet. And coming up soon, we will be doing our water lily weigh-off with a number of other botanical gardens in which we kind of compete to see whose Victorias will we champion this year by placing weight on the leaves.
Wow.
Last year we had 70 pounds, but we know from experience that the leaves can hold upwards and over 90 pounds of weight.
So how does it before it collapses or before it sinks? Like how do you measure it?
You can see on the edges of the leaf, there's all these network of veins. On the underside of that leaf, if you want, we can lift one up here. You can see that these veins, one, you can see Victoria's a little angry. She has some anger issues with all those spines. But the underside of the leaf with that network of spongy air-filled veins provides support for the leaf to expand, but it also provides incredible strength. And if the weight is distributed across the surface of that leaf, it can hold over 90 pounds. And I've seen people at Kew physically standing on them on a little platform to distribute the weight without any support underneath. So really one of the great botanical strong men or strong women of the world here with Victoria cruziana.
And if folks remember, we were at New York Botanic Gardens in the past fall, and we were seeing these as little babies behind the scenes, actually.
So this plant also has a remarkable growth rate. We start the seeds in January to February, in which they're only the size of a pea. And from that tiny seed over several months, the plants grow rapidly, each leaf almost doubling in size. This is a plant that loves warm water, warm temperatures, and the hot, humid summer we had this year has really allowed them to take off. You can see they've even started budding up here, in which this night blooming water lily, we just finished doing a time lapse for them, which we'll be putting up online soon. The day bloomers are open now, but the night bloomers will open at sunset and close at sunrise, and the Victorias will produce blooms 8 to 10 inches in diameter on these small plants. And if you come here early in the morning, you cannot miss the fragrance they produce, because it smells just like an overripe pineapple, in which this space will be filled with fragrance from these incredible and wonderful plants. One of my absolute favorite plants of all time.
Fantastic.
But we've also got a lot of really incredible plants in our rainforest galleries, and I want to share those with you today.
Awesome, let's do it.
As you travel into the rainforest galleries, our visitors are transported in which they journey first through a lowland rainforest, then eventually into an upland rainforest, learning about scientific exploration, research that happens here at the garden, but even just to understand and marvel at the plant biodiversity that exists in these spaces, in which our visitors not only are thrilled by incredible epiphytes like some of the bromeliads on this tree, but other oddities and rarities that exist here, essentially to teach the public about plant biodiversity and the need and importance for its conservation. Right above me is having a plant that's having a flowering moment, and probably one of my favorite plants in the conservatory, and anyone who works here with me knows I talk about it all the time. This is a plant that, despite its initial appearance looking like a brugmansia or an angel's trumpet, is not a member of the tomato family, but a member of the coffee family. This is a rarity called Osa pulchra. Native to the Osa Peninsula of Costa Rica and now another population found in Panama, the plant is naturally very rare, in which almost less than 24 plants exist in the wild. It was first found in one location, a second population was then discovered, but this is a plant that ourselves here at New York Botanical Garden and a couple of other botanical gardens work on propagating and preserving because of its natural rarity in the wild and some challenges regarding its cultivation. We have a number of them here in their conservatory, and when they bloom with these incredible white trumpet-shaped flowers, it really just stops everybody having a moment. It's also tremendously fragrant at night, and if you come in here at the right time, you can really get a whiff of that wonderful kind of somewhat jasmine-like fragrance.
Well, it also teaches you to look up, because even when we're here in the city, and oftentimes we don't look up. We don't look up at the buildings. We don't look up at the sky. But here, it teaches you to look up, or else you'd miss it.
Like anything, instead of taking time to smell the roses, you got to spend your time in this conservatory space. Look up and around, because some of the best things are a little bit hard to see initially. You may have to look at them from a distance, from above, below, and the more time you spend here, the more you see, just like visiting a rainforest. When you go to visit many of these plants in the wild, what seems like this blur of green is actually full of so many incredible little things, some which you have to stop and truly appreciate up close. We've got a wonderful member of the Acanthaceae, another favorite family of mine, truly underappreciated in horticulture, in which we have this beautiful aphelandra, in which many plants in this family have incredible bracts as a part of their floral display, and then producing these wonderful golden flowers. Another favorite plant family, Costus, the genus Costus, spiral gingers, many times called that because of their spiral stems, in which you have wonderful bracts and beautiful flowers that emerge from them.
This almost looks like I keep on looking at this, it almost looks like a Tradescantia.
You are correct. That is the same family. This is Dichorasandra pendula, a member of the spiderwort family.
Yeah.
So very identifiable with those beautiful 3 petals there, a wonderful shade of blue. And this plant sometimes gets a misnomer of blue ginger. And they're not members of the ginger family, even though they resemble them superficially.
Right, but you almost can't tell if it was not in flower. You would think it would be a ginger.
But the flowers give it away, in which you can definitely tell that this is a member of the spiderwort family.
For sure.
And even grows well as a houseplant.
And for houseplant owners, they would know Aphelandra squarosa, which is the zebra plant. So if that's something that you might actually recognize from there. So yeah, so this is a tropical, larger version of the Aphelandra squarosa as a houseplant.
This plant family is a family that I've taken a lot of interest in. Horticulturally, they were very popular during the Victorian era, in which many of them were introduced to glasshouses, notably in Europe, but many of them have also vanished from cultivation. And for a large family of hundreds of different species, there are so many that are horticulturally valuable and beautiful. I've been trying to add as many of them as I can to our collections here. Another plant family which often gets overlooked, but is the now kind of having a little moment amongst serious kind of crazy plant people like myself, is a family called the Cyclanthaceae, in which they are somewhat distantly related to aroids themselves, and you can see the cone of the seed head produced there. And what looks like a palm is not actually a palm, but a cyclanth. Many people are familiar with this plant, not in its living form, but its leaves as they're used in textiles. This particular plant is the Panama hat plant, in which the leaves are dried and woven into those famous Panama hats. But there are many members of the Cyclanthaceae, some of which have incredibly fragrant flowers. There's one we'll see in a little bit. Hopefully it's in bloom today, because the flower cluster looks like a pile of linguine on the end of a fork.
Oh, that's cool.
And it smells intensely of lemon. And this plant family has incredible foliage textures and plant forms, and has really become quite an interesting group of plants for people to grow and collect, adjacent to people who've been taken and enamored by the incredible foliage forms of aroids. Also in bloom today is one of my favorite plants of all time here in the conservatory. I think they're having a great day. Is an unusual member of the Dutchman's pipe family, Aristolochia arborea. And you can see its unusual flowering habit, in which it is cauliflorous, blooming from the stems and trunk of the tree. These cup-shaped flowers mimic fungi and actually will attract fungus gnats that pollinate them. But when it's in bloom, a related species was dubbed by the internet as the Darth Vader flower.
Oh, yes.
And so this is
good.
its cousin, Aristolochia arborea, but those bicolored blooms with this wonderful veination really providing a great show. But once again, you have to look up and around to discover some of the great rarities here and oddities here in the conservatory.
For people who are less tropical and live in New York, you will know that our Aristolochia macrophylla is the host plant of our pipevine swallowtail.
Yes, it is. Aristolochias contain a lot of chemical compounds in their foliage, and which why they've adapted as a host plant for many types of butterflies. Because as the butterflies feed on that foliage, they become impalatable to predators. So a defense mechanism and a wonderful relationship with certain groups of plants like Aristolochias. Of course, many of our visitors and plant people that come here get thrilled when they see the diversity of anthuriums within our collection. Some of these specimens, like the ones we're seeing here now, have been in our collection for over 100 years.
Wow, that's pretty
So
impressive.
they've been propagated and distributed here, and we're always adding to our collection because these velvet leaf anthuriums have remained popular since their addition to horticulture so many years ago.
Now, do you focus on the species, or do you, now, I mean, there's so many cultivated varieties now. What's kind of your MO?
So when it comes to anthuriums and aroids, since we are a botanical collection where research and education is very important, we do have a few horticultural hybrids, and who wouldn't love to have the diversity of, every hybrid produced by Dr. Block in a collection. But for us, it's really about species, showcasing their diversity, making them available for study, and to me, that conservation aspect is very important. Hybrids, like any plants, those trends come and go, but the species always remain. And since many of our aroids are historic plants, including some plants that are the original plants used for the type description of the species, to me, their value and preservation is primary.
But would you have those on display, especially the type specimens, or do you have those kind of behind the scenes?
There will be some coming up on display. We have many of them. We have an anthurium here that was collected by the founder of the institution. So to have that living history here, to me, is more important than kind of finding and acquiring every hybrid involved out there in the world. For me, I don't need a completionist collection of, say, anthuriums or philodendrons, but I try to focus on preserving rare and unusual species that exist within our collection and historic specimens that relate back to scientific research and discovery that happened here even before I started working at the garden. So another oddity I want to show you over here, I just noticed it in bloom. One of the weirdest flowering trees, another cauliflorous species. This used to be in the genus Herania.
Wow, it almost looks like a bat flower meets, a stapeliad.
Well, you're kind of on the right track there. What this now has been transferred to is the genus Theobroma.
Oh, so it's same as cocoa.
So it's the same as cocoa.
Cocoa, yeah.
So these weird cauliflorous plants, these wonderful tentacle flowers, can actually be the fruits used as a chocolate substitute, but they're really one of the weirder plants, and quite often people think they're big spiders crawling up and down the stem. But really one of the wildest flowers we have here in the conservatory on the weirdo meter.
It kind of reminds me of some of those little tentacles that orchids will have and blow in the breeze and
to attract a pollinator.
Yeah.
So that little bit of movement. One of my great things that interests me is pollination biology, the biomechanics of flowers. Thanks, Carl Nicholas, my Cornell advisor, for keeping me interested in biomechanics. And so when you study plants and flowers, you realize that plants are so much more than what many of us learned in our high school education, in which we're basically just taught they just sit there and photosynthesize and make oxygen. But when you study plants, their growth habits, their flowering, their architecture, their biomechanics, you realize they truly are incredible organisms, active and reactive to their environments, and many of them have some really crazy and bizarre strategies, all to achieve pollination, growth, survival, and distribution of their fruits. And this is what's kept me interested in plants throughout my career, is just this incredible fascination that I have for their biology, in which every day you kind of learn something new about them, which thrills me to no end.
So where are we heading to now? Because this
we are
room
now
feels
continuing
a little different.
through the lowland rainforest galleries into an area where we can really explore the height in this space, traveling up 30 feet high, in which what's great is we can allow a lot of our plants to get to full maturity. A lot of these plants may be familiar to home gardeners, whether they be certain anthurium varieties, some of the philodendrons, but here they can really reach their full potential beyond that of a small moss pole in your apartment. And many of our visitors love to come here to see what the potential of their plants can be. Whether it's this giant bird's nest anthurium here, sort of reigning king of the mountain here on this rock, with these incredible inflorescences, Anthurium salvinioides or salvinia, in which these things will start producing their seeds by the hundreds.
God, they look like snakes, babies.
Right? Every once in a while we have a visitor kind of jump scare when they turn the corner and see these things. Most often when they're in bloom, people smell them before they see them, because we often appreciate anthuriums for their foliage, but there are a few aroids that are, other than the Amorphophallus titanum, wonderfully fragrant. And some of these bird's nest anthuriums have really powerful fragrances, almost like overripe fruit.
Right.
So whether it appeals to your nose or not is a personal choice, but there really are a fantastic group of plants.
And actually, we'll link to a video because we talk specifically on scent of anthuriums, because we have some researchers that we've interviewed on it, which is wonderful.
Another one of these wonderful Cyclanthaceae, and a great plant that I often use to teach about botanical nomenclature. This is Cyclanthus biparteus, which means two parts. And if you look at the leaves, they're perfectly forked. So two forked leaves, a really incredible palm-looking plant, but every single cyclanth I come across, I've been kind of really enamored with, and they're really capturing a lot of my interest in terms of building our collection of them here at the garden. Of course, our anthuriums, when they're happy, will not only reseed here, but they just keep growing, in which we have a beautiful Anthurium digitatum that I'm going to have to work on propagating, a number of the velvet leaf anthuriums throughout here, all sorts of Ripsalis, another genus which we have an excellent collection of. But I want to show you a plant that a lot of our aroid people come and kind of admire and pay homage to, is the giant specimen of Ace of Spades that we have here. From one of the original original propagations from silver chrome, these Ace of Spades have been here for a decade or more, and some of them have leaves now almost approaching 2 feet long. And I quite often find people kind of crooking their necks up till they're sore, staring at that big specimen of the Ace of Spades. But throughout this gallery, we grow a huge diversity of plants. Some of them are historic to the institution in which they've been here for over 100 years old. We have collections particularly notable of the genus Brunfelsia, a lot of different Calathea species in the understory plantings here, Calatheas, Tenanthes, and other members of the Marantaceae. Some things that are difficult to grow outside of a tropical environment here, a number of Heliconia species on display, to show the diversity that exists in the lowland tropical rainforest. You have things like Erythrochiton brezilensis, another wonderful Rubiaceae with these great red bracts with big white flowers when they're open, including other weird things like curare. We have a curare plant here, the plant that's used to tip poison darts.
Oh.
So we have not only a lot of wonderful horticultural specimens, but a lot of ethnobotanical and scientific specimens as a part of our collection.
This is really funky. It almost looks like a deer foot, like in the mud, you know what I mean?
I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I never noticed that about it. So the leaf here of the small powder puff tree, giving that wonderful kind of legume leaf morphology.
Yeah. So is it a nitrogen fixer? Is it in the Fabaceae?
It is in the Fabaceae.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like many Fabaceae, it does have some nitrogen fixing abilities.
But you mentioned the spath. It smells so crazy.
Look, a lot of anthuriums, philodendrons get a lot of aroid love, and usually when you mention spathiphyllum, people kind of give you that face and maybe a little bit of an upturn in their nose. But this is a spathiphyllum species that we've had here, and years ago when I first started working here, every time I walked by this spot, I couldn't figure out where this insanely intense fragrance is coming from. I wish you could be here to smell this because it's almost overpowering. This spathiphyllum species produces tremendously fragrant blooms. They're somewhere in between kind of mint menthol and hyacinth in my mind.
Yeah, the hyacinth, and then it has that.
The longer you stay here, the stronger it gets.
Smell like the mint. Yeah.
There are times when you could practically taste it. It's so intense. And so spathiphyllums, I think, deserve a little more love, especially this one.
Yeah, and we were seeing the skipper
and you can see
on top.
It definitely, the pollinators do love it.
And now, what species is this of the spathiphyllum?
It's, so far in our collection, it doesn't have an identification, so if there's any spathiphyllum experts out there, I haven't had a chance to show this to Tom Crote or not to see whether he might know what it is, but either way, she's definitely earned her place here in the conservatory. Not only is it a vigorous growing species, but the fragrance of these blooms is just first class. So one of the botanical collections we have here, both in our back of house research collections and the conservatory collections that we're known for, are our neotropical blueberries, the ericads. One of our scientists, Dr. Jim Luton, spent his entire career studying these plants throughout Central and South America, not only describing many of these species for the first time, but studying their taxonomy and evolution, and occasionally he still shows up to check on his plants. But this is one of my favorites here, Anthopteris wardi. Not only does it produce an abundance of these wonderful kind of Chinese lantern-looking blooms, completely covering the branches, but after the flowers fall, the calyxes start out as white, and eventually they start swelling, in which you can see these blueberry-like fruits that they produce. We worked years ago with a researcher at a local university, Lehman College, in which they investigated the antioxidant compounds, and some of the fruits on these ericads can produce 10 times the number of antioxidants as a traditional blueberry. They're really incredible, and we even discovered a couple of compounds that were not before known to science produced by these plants.
Wow.
They're a real favorite of our plant visitors, not only for their beauty, their architecture, but the incredible flowers they produce.
And you mentioned off camera that some people would mistake this for a Hoya, and I could totally see why. And they're very waxy, like a wax flower too.
When you come upon this plant, your mind goes to, what is this? And for a lot of people, they never think it's a member of the rhododendron or blueberry family. It doesn't look like the shrubs we're all so familiar with from our gardens around here. But when you learn about their biology, they're unmistakably ericaceous plants. But for most people, they look at it, and the closest thing they can think of is a Hoya. But you can see it lacks those wonderful waxy thick leaves. It's not a vine, but a epiphytic shrub. But those blooms are just really wild and totally fantastical. So throughout the understory here, a number of great ground covers. Another one of these wonderful Acanthaceae here, in which you have, it's now kind of seeding around. Calatheas with their endless patterns of foliage. Mosaica here with those wonderful mosaic net veinated leaves, providing some camouflage there. A number of wonderful gingers, Costa stenophilus with these really amazing bamboo-like stems, and the blooms here, once again, produced at the base of the plant.
Yeah, it almost looks like rhizomatous, and it kind of just comes up.
Lateral inflorescences with those great red bracts.
Wow.
With those wonderful yellow flowers, a really great member of the Costaceae. And what a lot of people don't see their calatheas in flower, there are some species like Calathea losneri, which produces this incredible inflorescence with these great top knot of bracts, and the individual flowers being these tiny little blooms that emerge and only last a day or so. So things you to think about, calatheas for foliage, but there are also many calatheas that produce some really beautiful blooms as well. Of course, another one of our ace of spades, which always stops people as they turn the corner with these enormous velvet leaves.
It's got a great inflorescence as well.
You know, with a lot of the aroids, you know, we often are so focused on the foliage, we forget that there's many of them that have really beautiful blooms. And it doesn't have to be brightly colored. Even that great kind of strawberry colored spadix against those dark leaves really is a incredible contrast. A relative of that rare Ossipulchra we talked about earlier is an uncommon plant from Cuba. This is Cubanola domingensis. And with these long tubular blooms, probably pollinated by a night-flying sphinx moth with a long tongue, very similar to a lot of night-blooming plants, in which the only way the nectar can be accessed is if you've got a tongue long enough to get down the tube of that flower. So somebody out there is figured out how to pollinate this bloom and succeeds in doing it. Really, another one of these great horticultural oddities. Very subtle in its beauty, but really remarkable in flower.
Phenomenal.
So let's go to the upland rainforest and see some interesting plants there.
Oh, speaking of Aristolochia, here we go.
One of the favorite spaces of our visitors, in which people love to come in here, chill for a moment amongst the flowering vines, whether it's the Thunbergia that's in flower, the jade vine that's in bloom, but just the sound of the cascading water, finding a moment of peace in here. Right now, the beautiful pots of variegated Hymenicalis, an aquatic member of the Amaryllidaceae, are in full flower, and the flowers only last about a day or so, so it puts on a temporary but spectacular bloom display here in the conservatory. Rather than those lowland rainforest recreations, if you came to the conservatory when it was first founded, you would find a greenhouse full of plants displayed similar to that we see here. Plants growing in containers rather than these rainforest recreations we have throughout many of the galleries. So this is kind of an homage to the original conservatory and how it might have looked back in its early days when the conservatory was first fully open to the public in the early 1900s.
So it was really, back then, the first container gardening was all gardening in containers.
So the founder of the institution wanted to create an incredible destination, very similar to the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew here in New York. As a part of building this conservatory, educating the public, and providing a space to grow plants for scientific research and exploration, the conservatory started its journey as one of the great and iconic spaces for horticulture in New York City back in the early 1900s, in which many of the plants, a few of the bigger trees were planted in the ground, but many of them were grown in containers. That way they could be moved around. So the spaces that you saw then were very different than what our visitors experience now. As we transition into an area which is planted very differently as an upland rainforest, in which the biodiversity is different than the lowland rainforest, in which we have a lot of our neotropical ericads in here, mimicking the environment they would be found in nature, in which you would have a more of a cloud forest type environment with rolling topography, as well as a very different diversity of plants, including a lot of ferns, palms, ericads, bromeliads, plants that are found in areas where you have very high rainfall, very high natural ambient moisture, in which mosses cover the surface of things, selaginellas. And if you've ever traveled to a cloud forest, whether it's in Costa Rica or where I go to in Colombia, I feel just at home here because of the diversity of plants that exist in this space, but also the feel. As we transition in this next space, many people notice this wonderful, cool breeze that flows through these spaces. Like any greenhouse, as warm air rises, it escapes the vents. And the way this greenhouse is designed is similar. As that warm air moves up and out the vents, it pulls cooler air in through the side vents, and as we apply a lot of the moisture in here, creates this wonderful evaporative cooling effect, which benefits all of the different types of plants that grow in these spaces. Because cool, moist, and humid is what they're about. From the mosses to the melastomes, to the podocarps, to the orchids, they love this space with this constant moisture and humidity. We have a lot of tree ferns in here to provide a higher canopy of shade, but also keep that humidity very constant. Most of the plants in this space require constant humidity. They don't like drying out either at the roots or in the air for any long periods of time. And you can see with the abundant layer of mosses and selaginellas, it's a perfect environment for plants that love humid conditions. And as far as I'm concerned, in the summer, this is one of my favorite spots because not only are you surrounded by this sea of green textures, but what I love about this space is you travel downward in a path, eventually reaching the tunnel in which you can access other areas of the conservatory. So to me, it's kind of descending into a pool of green. And so as you walk through this space, you feel increasingly immersed by the plants that surround you. These are plants that are pollinated by hummingbirds in the wild. As we all know about hummingbird pollination, these are plants that have brightly colored and contrasting flowers to attract their pollinator. Ericads have what's referred to as a poricidal anther. The anther that has a pore on one end, and it's essentially, you know, like a pixie stick, that tube full of sugar? Well, those tubes here are full of pollen. And the way this plant biomechanically has figured out to a relationship with its pollinator is when the hummingbird visits, the vibration and movement from the hummingbird visiting the flower causes the pollen to pour out of those tubes. So it has a way to distinguish.
Looks like there is an ant.
There's some ants in there living on the nectar.
And then literally covered in
They're
pollen
covered
now.
in pollen. So just that movement released that pollen, and it would dust the head of the hummingbird. So as it moves from bloom to bloom, the plant only releases its pollen at the right moment, making sure that the right organism does the job.
So the hummingbird is really only there for the carb and not necessarily the protein.
Not the protein of the pollen.
Okay, and the protein of the pollen just gets dusted on
Dusted,
the
and so
head.
when he visits from flower to flower, it transfers the pollen from one ericad to another. Kind of one of those great little fun things that, unless you walk around with one of the crazy curators like myself, most people don't realize. But really, one of the wonderful things about the diversity of plants here is the stories that exist behind them.
Well, I got to eat, I don't know if it was this species of flower, but I think I was in the presence of Chad Husby at the Fairchild Gardens, and I tasted it, and it was like a cross between a rhubarb and a cucumber.
Yeah, they have an interesting flavor. I generally don't tell people to try the neotropical blueberries because there are a few of them that are kind of toxic and they'll give you one hell of a stomachache. So better looked at than tasted.
There you
Although
go.
in Colombia, they do harvest and they're now starting to cultivate a number of these as a specialty fruit crop. In Colombia, and I've tasted those. They're quite delicious. They taste like a really juicy, watery blueberry.
Interesting.
Very sweet and a very different flavor profile than we're accustomed to.
But you're talking about the fruit, right?
The fruit, not the flower. Not
yeah,
the flower.
Yeah. I would imagine because it tasted a little bit like rhubarb that it has some oxalic acid in it, which is the thing that probably
Will
could give you a really
bellyache.
bad bellyache.
Here we have a gardener. No.
There's a gardener in the
Here's
wild.
a gardener in the wild. Karen, she's trying to hide here, but she can't hide. Oh, I can smell it. Where's that flower open?
I do smell it. What
is that your mosquito repellent?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I need some of that.
So,
my arms are getting ripped up.
We talked about cyclanth.
Do you have a little spray? Okay.
We'll take a pause. So we talked about Cyclanthaceae, a really awesome family, in which many cyclanth are found adjacent to waterfalls in the wild, in which they colonize wet spaces that many other plants cannot. And this plant, Dicranopygium stenophyllum, the flowers are off of it right now, but it looks like a head of linguine on the end of that stem, and it smells intensely like lemon pledge. Really super citrusy, citronella, but really these graceful sort of bifurcated leaves here. And I'm trying to work on establishing a number of other cyclanths in here, because this is a habitat where it's very similar to where you would find them in the wild.
Now, what about the roots that give it its ability to be able to take on riparian areas?
They have very fine root systems, in which they're mostly surface rooted in the moss layer on stones. They distribute their seeds by shooting them out of the seed pod, and so they wind up colonizing areas rather quickly. There's a wonderful plant that was once a rarity, now becoming more common in cultivation, coming from Panama, which makes beautiful little rosettes of really dusky purple foliage. One of the most beautiful of the Cyclanthaceae. And I've got some seedlings growing in the back of House Greenhouse, and I'm looking forward to planting them so they can establish and colonize this waterfall, just like the maidenhair ferns have. As you travel and you exit the rainforest galleries, the environment completely changes. You enter into our desert galleries. Many of our visitors, including the VP here, find this to be their favorite spaces. Not only because of the wonderful textures and the plant forms themselves, but of course the remarkable diversity of plants that exist in this space. Everything from your opuntias to your agaves, all the different varieties of cacti, including these gigantic tree-form opuntias, the arborescent opuntias that we have here. Another odd family that is also popular with the succulent collectors, because many of them have caudiciform-like stems, is the Burseraceae family. So the family that includes plants that produce very aromatic resins would include frankincense, and some of the species native to Central American deserts, Bursera fragiroides, with this incredible peeling bark. As it ages, that bark just peels off the stems, creating just beautiful architecture here. They're tremendously fragrant on their foliage. And so in these spaces, there's a diversity of plants far beyond the cacti that most people associate. A number of xeric bromeliads, dicheas, orthophytums, hectias, beautiful but really angry plants.
Wait, what is a hectia?
Hectia is a genus of xeric bromeliads native to the southwestern United States through Mexico, many of which have these really silvery and glaucous leaves.
So it looks like a dicea, but...
It looks like dicea. Genus is Hectia, in which they're really wonderful but very angry plants. Most people, when you want to repot these, they'd rather repot an opuntia than one of those bromeliads because they're pretty darn vicious.
Oh, look at this.
Our monstrous Cereus here, getting ready to bloom, blooming after dark, one of the night blooming cacti. Fill this space with fragrance. We often get to see them flower, but they're usually closed by the time we open. A number of our cacti have produced their flowers early in spring, in which they will produce these gorgeous satiny blooms throughout this collection.
Well, what I always love about the desert house is just this verdigris color, this bluish glaucous hue. It makes it so photogenic in a different kind of manner than the tropical
in terms of living sculpture, you can't get much better than this. Whether it's the beautiful columnar cacti, some of them with these furry spines on there, or this kind of living fiber optic plants like the Daisylirians. They're just really, the forms and shapes are intensely diverse.
Fiber optic is never what I would have considered for a description.
Remember those fiber optic? I don't know. Am I dating myself? But those fiber optic lamps that lit up.
It's perfect. It's a perfect descriptor.
And what I love about some of these plants, like especially this Daisylirian, as you move around it, it almost creates this weird optical illusion where you're not really sure because as those leaves kind of overlap each other and the way the light and shadow is on them, it gives this really wild effect that you can't experience unless you're up close. A single photograph doesn't do it justice, because it's really about not only the three-dimensional architecture of this, but that wonderful play in your vision that the leaves have in these spaces. As we move into the other desert collection, a lot of people may think that these are just more cacti and succulents. But this display of the African desert plants is to teach about not only xeric plant diversity, but also the concept of convergent evolution, in which two different organisms evolving in different habitats have similar adaptations for survival, in which you see the beautiful columnar Euphorbia abyssinica looking like that classic saguaro of the American Southwest, but is really a desert member of the poinsettia family, which no matter how many times people hear that fact, it's still astonishing to think that this plant evolving in a desert environment rather than producing leafy stems has now evolved this columnar succulents, these tree euphorbias.
I've always wondered about the phylogeny of Euphorbia because it is so diverse, and I wonder. So alien, but they're diverse within the genus itself. So it makes me wonder, like, how old they must be to have that diversification.
Like the orchid family, where you have this spectacular diversity throughout the distribution of the plants, what I believe we're seeing is the peak diversity in a genus or a family. And if we were to travel in a time machine millions of years from now, maybe it wouldn't be that many. There'd be fewer and fewer. They're incredibly adaptive, they're resilient, they can grow in everything from aquatic environments to some of the driest places on Earth. And it's a family that is botanically very interesting, not only in its diversity of form, but also in its range of adaptations. One of my favorites that we added to our collection this year is Euphorbia stenoclada. This incredible species from Madagascar, and which, as you said, you can't get much better in terms of plant architecture than these spiny stems here, but that beautiful powdery blue color. We'll be planting this into one of the beds permanently, allowing it to get up to full size. And so this way it can grow here for many years to come. Really a beautiful species, Euphorbia stenoclada there. And throughout the conservatory, you'll also see a number of aloe species in which we maintain a very good collection, far beyond that of aloe vera. The diversity of forms of leaves and aloes and the patterns that exist on the leaves, foliages is remarkable. One of my favorites in its summer kind of green phase here, Aloe dorothei, an endangered species.
Yeah, it does get quite orange, right?
Red in cool weather. So during the winter, if you came back, this would be kind of this cherry red-orange color, and the change in color between the seasons is beautiful. Of course, many of the tree-form aloes, a lot of the other oddities in here, Dideriaceae, in which you have Aloadia and Dideria, these strange, spiny, succulent tree-like plants from Madagascar, in which they comprise parts of the spiny forest that exists there, and a number of unusual cycads, including another one of my conservatory favorites, our plant of Encephalartos hardus, one of the unfriendliest plants here, in which these wonderful leaves have these gorgeous, not only coloring, but this incredible overlapping pattern. Really a great, great specimen here. So whether you're here for foliage or flowers or plant form, there's something for everyone. Whether you're looking for your specimen aroids or you're really into cacti and succulents, the conservatory is full of some really incredible plants, and I'm happy I got to share some of that with you today.
Absolutely fabulous, Marc. Thank you so much.
Stay tuned on Plant One On Me for more botanical tours, talks, and how-tos. And if you're looking to further your knowledge on the plant kingdom, then have a look at our various online courses from Troubleshoot Your Houseplants to the Houseplant Masterclass. Additionally, we have a second channel we started last year called Flock Finger Lakes, where we cover more on outdoor gardening, habitat restoration, agroforestry, and even more. So check that out if that interests you. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next episode.